The story of House Hightower begins not in the Age of Heroes, but in the dawn of days, at the very root of recorded Westerosi history. It all starts with a legendary king named Uthor of the High Tower. In this ancient time, Uthor ruled over the mouth of the Honeywine, where it meets the Whispering Sound. To raise a seat worthy of his line, Uthor commissioned Brandon the Builder, the same legendary architect credited with raising Winterfell, the Wall, and possibly Storm's End, to design the very first stone high tower. Uthor then sealed his place in Reach mythology by marrying Maris the Maid, daughter of the legendary Garth Greenhand. Their sons defined the two great vocations that would shape the family for the next 10,000 years. The elder, King Euron Hightower, ruled as a warrior. The younger, Prince Paramore the Twisted, a sickly and bookish second son, set aside land and resources to gather wise men from across the known world. Paramore's pets, the chroniclers called them. They would eventually become the Order of the Maesters, and the Citadel they founded would become the heart of Westerosi knowledge. It's worth noting that the High Tower does not stand on raw earth. It stands atop a far older blackstone fortress whose origins remain a mystery. Some Maesters claim it was Valyrian, others believe it was raised by the maze makers of Lorath, and one, the Ironborn Maester Theron, argued that the Deep Ones themselves laid the stones, citing its eerie resemblance to the Seastone chair on Old Wyke. For now, though, what matters is the line. From Uthor and Maris descended a long line of kings who ruled Oldtown as independent monarchs for thousands of years. Most of those kings are lost to history, but a few stand out. After attempted sackings by the Dornish king Samwell Dane, by Cord the Cruel of the Ironborn, and even by Giles Gardner I of Highgarden, who sold much of the city into slavery but could not breach the High Tower itself, King Otto II Hightower ringed Oldtown in massive stone walls that still stand today. But the defining king of the early era was Lymond Hightower, the Sea Lion. Lymond defied the Iron Islands, killed King Euron Greyjoy III in battle, and built the greatest fleet in Westeros. His statue still overlooks Oldtown Harbor, gazing down Whispering Sound. Yet for all his power at sea, Lymond chose a more diplomatic path when it came to managing the threat of Highgarden, engineering an extraordinary double marriage with King Garland Gardner II. Lymond wed Garland's daughter, and Garland set aside his own wives to wed Lymond's daughter. With that union, Lymond became the last Hightower king and the first Hightower lord. Later, when the Andals came across the Narrow Sea, the Hightowers and the Gardners did something few First Men House managed. They allied with the invaders, kept their wealth and lands intact, and grew richer with every generation. Under their new Gardner overlords, the Hightowers turned to trade and to the Seven. Lord Daemon Hightower, called the Devout, was among the first great lords in Westeros to accept the faith of the Seven. His son, Lord Tristan Hightower, raised the Starry Sept at Oldtown, which would serve for thousands of years as the seat of the High Septon and the very heart of the faith. And Tristan's son, Lord Barris Hightower, gave the High Septon his first crystal crown. Between these three lords, the Hightowers turned Oldtown into the religious capital of Westeros, both a blessing and a curse. For the next several thousand years, while the rest of the continent tore itself apart, the Hightowers tended their own gardens, trading, building, and quietly waiting. Then the dragons came. When Aegon the Conqueror arrived at Oldtown in 1 AC, the lord of the city was Manfred Hightower. The reigning High Septon, a Hightower kinsman by marriage, had had a vision that the Hightower would burn with the rest of the city if Oldtown resisted the Targaryens. So when Manfred's liege lord, King Mern Gardner IX, marched off to die at the Field of Fire, Manfred did not march with him. When Aegon arrived at Oldtown on Balerion's back, Manfred opened his gates. Aegon spared the city, and the High Septon then anointed Aegon as king of all 7 kingdoms inside the Starry Sept. The official religious legitimization of the Targaryen dynasty was performed by a Hightower kinsman in a Hightower-built sept, in a city that embraced their conquerors without a fight. Manfred's daughter Cerise then became the first wife of Prince Maegor Targaryen in 25 AC, in a match arranged by her High Septon uncle to bind the crown and the faith. She was 23, Maegor was 13. By 39 AC, Maegor had declared her barren and taken another wife, the second of 5. Cerise died in 45 AC, officially of sudden illness, though it was rumored that Maegor had her tongue cut out for a sharp remark and that the knife had slipped. Most historians treat the story as slander, but it spread widely at the time. The Lord of Oldtown, believed to be Cerise's brother Martyn, then did something extraordinary. When Maegor later ordered him to behead the child princess Rhaella Targaryen, a young girl who had been sent to Oldtown to be raised as a septa, he refused. He imprisoned the messenger instead. That single act of defiance helped clear the path for Jaehaerys the Conciliator to take the throne, and the Hightowers were rewarded with the long peace that followed. The next several generations are quieter. Donald Hightower and his successors ruled Oldtown through the long reign of the Old King without major incident. But late in that reign, the Hightowers returned to center stage. If you're enjoying this deep dive, we can light the way to our next video if you smash that subscribe button. In 101 AC, after the death of his last great hand, Prince Balon Targaryen, the dying King Jaehaerys named Sir Otto Hightower as his new Hand of the King. Jaehaerys was bedridden in his final 2 years, and Otto effectively ruled the realm. He brought his 13-year-old daughter Alicent Hightower to court to nurse the dying king, feeding him, dressing him, reading to him. In his confusion, the old king sometimes called her by his lost daughter's name, Sarah. 5 years later, after Queen Aemma Arryn died in childbirth, King Viserys Targaryen I married Alicent Hightower. Their marriage produced 4 children, Aegon, Helaena, Aemond, and Daeron, and, crucially, male heirs. This would set the stage for the most devastating civil war in Westerosi history. When Viserys died in 129 AC, Otto Hightower crowned his grandson Aegon II in defiance of the king's named heir, his daughter Rhaenyra. This ignited the Dance of the Dragons. Otto installed his son Sir Gawain Hightower as second-in-command of the Gold Cloaks, watching Commander Luther Largent for any sign that the city's defenses might turn. At the start of the dance, the actual head of the family was Otto's nephew, Lord Ormond Hightower, wielder of the Valyrian steel sword Vigilance and cousin to Queen Alicent. Ormond's first wife gave him 4 children, Lionel, Martyn, Garmund, and Bethany, before dying in childbirth. He then married Lady Samantha Sam Tarly, a beautiful young woman from a black-aligned house, and only 2 years older than his own son Lionel. The marriage was strained from the start. Worse for the Hightowers, 3 of their own banner houses, Beesbury, Costain, and Mullendore, declared for Rhaenyra, forcing Ormond to fight his own vassals before he could even reach the war. But the Hightower host had one decisive weapon. Alicent's youngest son, Prince Daeron Targaryen, was Ormond's squire and ward at Oldtown, and the rider of the Blue Dragon Tessarion. At the Battle of the Honeywine, with Ormond's host pinned between 2 enemy armies, Daeron arrived on Tessarion in the rear, smashed the southern force, and scattered the rest. Ormond knighted him on the field with Vigilance. Daeron the Daring. The Hightower army then took Longtable, sacked Bitterbridge in revenge for the murder of Prince Maelor, and marched on Tumbleton. There, in 130 AC, at the First Battle of Tumbleton, Lord Roderick Dustin of Barrowton, leading the legendary Winter Wolves, fought through 10 times his number to reach the Hightower banners. He killed Lord Ormond Hightower and his kinsman Sir Brynden Hightower in a single charge. The Greens won the battle posthumously through the 2 betrayers, Hugh Hammer and Ulf White, but the head of House Hightower was dead on the field. His kinsman Sir Hobart Hightower assumed command ineffectually. After his failure at the Second Battle of Tumbleton and desperate to make amends, Hobart poisoned Sir Ulf White's wine. To reassure his victim, he drank from the same cask himself, knowing that it would kill him. Both men died. Back in King's Landing, the war came for Alicent's family. After her son's coronation, Alicent had moved her chambers to the Tower of the Hand, to be near her father, making her grandchildren reachable. 2 assassins, Blood and Cheese, broke in, bound and gagged Alicent, and beheaded her grandson Prince Jaehaerys in front of her and his own mother. Queen Helaena went mad with grief and never recovered. Soon after, Rhaenyra's forces retook the city. Sir Gawain Hightower was killed on the order of Luther Largent, whose gold cloaks then opened the gates for the Blacks. Otto Hightower was the first traitor Rhaenyra beheaded, the architect of the war receiving his architect's reward. Alicent herself was captured and bound in golden fetters, known thereafter as the Queen in Chains. Rhaenyra spared her, by her own admission, for the sake of our father, who loved you once. And not long afterward, Daeron the Daring, the boy who had won the Honeywine and saved his house, died in the rout at Second Tumbleton. Some say he was cut down while fleeing his burning tent, others that the tent collapsed on him. Alicent died of winter fever in 133 AC, weeping for her dead children in Maegor's holdfast. Her granddaughter Jaehaera, the last living child of Aegon II, died that same year. The direct Targaryen line of Alicent Hightower was extinct. In Oldtown, however, the Hightower line survived. Barely. Lord Lionel Hightower, Ormond's 15-year-old son, inherited the family at the worst possible moment. He initially refused all peace, tearing up Corlys Valerian's terms and vowing to write his reply in the sea snake's blood. His stepmother, Samantha Tarley, persuaded him otherwise, according to the bawdy chronicler Mushroom, by taking him to bed and promising to marry him if he signed. The two lived openly as lovers for 13 years, the High Septon condemning their union as a form of incest. Samantha later founded the Bank of Oldtown after the Rogari Bank collapsed, and in the symbolic act that finally healed the breach between the warring branches, one of Ormond's other sons, Garmund Hightower, then married Princess Rhaena Targaryen, Rhaenyra's stepdaughter. The Black and Green lines, having destroyed each other in war, were quietly rejoined through a Hightower marriage. Garmund and Rhaena had 6 daughters together. If you're enjoying this comprehensive tour of the Hightower line, why not leave a like to keep our beacon burning? After the dance, the Hightowers stayed largely out of trouble. The losses had been too brutal. They gave only lukewarm support to either side during the Blackfyre rebellions. One Hightower did return to the inner circle of power, Lord Jon Hightower, who served as Hand of the King to Aegon IV, the Unworthy. Jon personally brought the legendary mistress Serenai of Lys to Aegon's court, contributing in his own quiet way to the tangled succession that would eventually produce Daemon Blackfyre and decades of civil war. Then, 2.5 centuries later, the Hightowers produced one of the most famous knights in the Order's history. Sir Gerald Hightower, the White Bull, uncle of the current Lord, became Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, after Sir Duncan the Tall died at Summerhall in 259 AC. He commanded the royal forces at the War of the Ninepenny Kings, fastened Jaime Lannister's white cloak about his shoulders at the tourney at Harrenhal in 281 AC, and stood in silence while Aerys the Mad King burned Lord Rickard Stark alive in the throne room. He told the disgusted young Jaime, "We are sworn to defend the king, not to judge him." When the dynasty fell, Gerald died at the Tower of Joy in 283 AC. He was killed by Ned Stark and Howland Reed alongside Arthur Dayne and Oswell Went, after the 3 White Cloaks refused to kneel to Robert Baratheon and refused to leave Lyanna Stark's bedside. Which brings us to the modern era and to one of the strangest chapters of Hightower history. By the time of the War of the Five Kings, the Lord of Oldtown is Leyton Hightower, voice of Oldtown, defender of the Citadel, beacon of the South, nephew of Gerald the White Bull. He has had 4 wives, the current being Lady Rhea Florent, and at least 10 known children. By the events of the books, Leyton has not descended from the Hightower in over a decade. Locked at the very top with his eldest daughter Melora Hightower, called the Mad Maid, he reads books of spells, alchemy, and necromancy. When Samwell Tarly arrives at Oldtown to train as a maester, the captain of his ship tells him the rumor going around the docks. Lord Leyton's locked atop his tower with the Mad Maid, consulting books of spells. Might be he'll raise an army from the deeps. His children are scattered across the map of Westeros. Sir Baelor Hightower, Bright Smile, is the heir, married to Rhonda Rowan. Princess Elia Martell once briefly considered him for marriage, until her brother Oberyn mocked him for breaking wind in their presence. The middle daughter, Lady Allery Hightower, married Lord Mace Tyrell of Highgarden, making Leyton Hightower the grandfather of Willis, Garland, Loras, and Marjorie Tyrell. Through Marjorie's 3 royal marriages, Renly, Joffrey, and Tommen, the Hightowers came within a heartbeat of putting their blood on the Iron Throne before the destruction of the Sept of Baelor destroyed the line, in the show's continuity at least. The youngest daughter is perhaps the most quietly significant. Lyness Hightower married Sir Jorah Mormont at the tourney at Lannisport. Jorah, who was newly knighted, defeated Jaime Lannister in the final, named Lyness his Queen of Love and Beauty, and asked Leyton for her hand the same night. Lyness hated Bear Island, ruined Jorah financially with her extravagant tastes, and fled with him to Lys when his slaving was uncovered, eventually leaving him for the merchant Tregar Ormalin. Jorah later told Daenerys Targaryen that Lyness looked a bit like you, Daenerys. The buried thread connecting House Hightower to the rise of the last Dragon Queen runs straight through that line. The rest of Leyton's brood spread Hightower influence across the Reach. Sir Garth Hightower, called Greysteel, was his master-at-arms. Denise married into House Redwine. Layla married into House Cups. Alysanne married into House Ambrose. Sir Gunthor married into House Fossaway. And Sir Humphrey would sail east to Lys, hoping to hire cell sales through his disgraced sister. When Euron Greyjoy's Ironborn seized the shields, raided the Arbor, and threatened Oldtown itself, Leyton sent his sons out to defend the city. Baelor building ships, Gunther fortifying the harbor, Garth training men, Humphrey seeking cell sails, while he and Melora stayed locked at the top of the tower, with their spellbooks open and the Hightower's beacon burning. So that's the whole story of House Hightower. Who are you most looking forward to seeing in House of the Dragon Season 3? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the family that lights the way, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell, so you don't miss our next deep dive into one of the great houses of Westeros.